that most entrepreneurial endeavors don't even last 5 years. And in trucking, it's even worse. I want to say it's 80% of brand new businesses fail in the first year. And so when you've got such a high percentage rate, what we see it as is I don't want to spend all of our time and energy bringing clients on and then having them fall off the wayside because they weren't educated and they didn't have the resources to be successful.
Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. I'm your host, Briggs, and each week I bring you stories and tactics from the world's greatest military veterans, both from today and in history, all at the top of their craft. This show is going to make you more informed about unique industries and careers. It's going to get you asking questions, both of yourself and of your professional career. I highly encourage and desire personally to look inward, to grow in both of those categories as well. And I want you to do that as well. If you're not interested in that, this show is not for you. And the last thing it's going to do is it's going to give you specific steps on how you can become more lethal in your life and business. All of that information that we're covering is absolutely of no use if we can't turn it into something actionable. So we're going to try and drill it down, make it as simple as possible so you can walk away with something tangible. Today, I'm speaking with Tom Croteau. Tom is a former Air Force maintainer and the current president and owner of Operfi. Operfi is a factoring company serving the $800 billion trucking and logistics industry. In this conversation, you're going to learn what factoring is. Put simply, factoring is the buying and selling of accounts receivable. That's important to know because if you're starting a business before you've been in business for 2 years, a bank's not going to lend you any money. So if you go out and start something and you get a purchase order, you can use that purchase order and sell to a factoring company in order to get cash upfront for working capital and continue to operate your business. There's a lot of companies in that space, and that's why factoring companies exist. Like I said, Tom serves the trucking and logistics companies specifically, and there's been a massive inflow of those types of businesses on the heels of COVID-19. We also get into Tom's training and education program he's currently building out for his carriers. If you sell anything B2B, it's critical that your customers remain in business. As I mentioned, trucking is a super difficult industry and there's very low barriers to entry. The last few years, there's been a lot of people joining just because of the current state of logistics, which is now evening out, which we talk about. Tom gives us a pulse on the economic forecast for trucking, but Tom and his team are building out an education product which helps educate and inform their customers so that they can be better at their business and ultimately stay in business. I think it's a very, very smart tactic using media to educate and retain clients and customers. That's something that we talk a lot about on this show. Power of media is huge. You can find this episode as well as all other episodes, video versions, transcripts, written content to keep learning, all at scuttlebuttpodcast.co. Please enjoy this conversation with Tom Croteau.
It's been an interesting journey, to say the least, to what brings me here talking to you. So my military career, I joined the Air Force 2006. I grew up Northern California, and I didn't have that burning desire that I needed to go away to a fraternity or dorm life or just really leave my town for college. I got accepted into some decent colleges, but nothing that was really calling to me and nothing that was really like top tier. I was a soccer player. So I just decided I wanted to stick around. I knew the coach that was at my community college that was local. Did that for a couple of years. I thought, hey, let me get some education. Let me see if I can transfer as a junior, see if I can get some sort of scholarship. And none of those things really panned out and didn't get the scholarships that I wanted and not those top tier schools that I was looking for. So I thought, okay, what was the next best option? And I had a grandfather that was in the military. He was a pilot in the Air Force. My dad was in the Army. And I don't know, there was something about it where I was like, hey, why don't I maybe start going down this rabbit hole and seeing what the military is all about? So walked into a recruiter's office, and it's funny because everybody tells you, especially being from Northern California, right? Everyone's like, hey, stay away from the military. But I go into the recruiter's office, and all my friends and my friends' parents thought that the military and these recruiters, that they just lie to you, right? They told me all of these things that you could accomplish. They said that you can get your degree while you're in. They said that you could potentially go to the academy if you wanted to. You could play soccer for the Air Force, the Navy, Air Force, all the different armed forces have their own enlisted and commissioned sports programs. They gave me all these different kind of career goals that I could achieve. And there's none of it was a lie. I went into the military and almost accomplished everything that I really wanted to set out to or had within my reach those abilities to and the opportunities to. So I go into the military and I wanted to surround myself with aircraft because I did want to eventually transition to becoming a pilot and potentially go into the academy. And so I was a C5 crew chief. So for some of your viewers, we were just jack of all trade, master of none. We are wrench turners on aircraft. C5s are massive cargo planes that you can fit 6 Greyhound buses in, 2 by 2 within the cargo bays. Just massive birds that are constantly breaking the second that they land. So I got a lot of good experience working around aircraft and met some great friends, had just a great opportunity to learn. And I think that's where it instilled those military core values that I really needed: integrity, excellence, service before self. Those are the Air Force core values. After a couple of years, I was going to school while I was in and had some deployments and some missions that I went off to. But there was something about it where I was looking at it saying, okay, I got my degree, could have had an opportunity to transition to the academy or at least go into OCS. And there was something about it that said, okay, if I transition or if I do this, and then I'm going to have to dedicate X number of years after the military, after I commission. And then at that point, how many years was that? And I was just doing the math. And I don't know, there was something and I was young, dumb, and I think that my ego as well. I don't know, the military is not for me after 20 years. So I started looking at business school options. And lo and behold, when you're looking at business schools, you have to take something that's called GMAT and kind of an entry level, kind of like similar to the SATs. And so I take that. Those scores go off to all the different universities throughout the country. Me being a California kid, thought that I was going to go to a California schools. That was the only schools that I was looking at. And one day I get this postcard in the mail, and there's this handwritten note on it from the Dean of Admissions at the University of Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is unique in that 10% of their graduating class every year in their business program is prior military. The dean, his father, his grandfather were both military as well. And they think it brings a different dynamic to the classroom discussion where you've got accountants, consultants, sales reps, or whoever they are, whatever their different industries that they're coming in. And then you've got military personnel who come in with a completely different perspective when it comes to things that are happening overseas. And it was just very interesting conversations. I was the only enlisted guy out of all my buddies that were there. So I got a lot of crap because I was the low man on the totem pole. But just it was there where I really got bought in. I bonded with my military brothers that were there, plus all the individuals that I went to school with. The core values at Notre Dame are very similar to the core values that are instilled, I think, in military personnel. There, I studied entrepreneurship and really focused on startup classes because there was something inside of me that I wanted to go out and maybe start a business when everything was all said and done. Fast forward 2 years, graduate. And upon graduation, I had a unique opportunity to go work for, I guess you could say it was a startup. It was a 4 or 5 person shop, a company in a very niche service called factoring. And it was a specialty finance industry, and they specialized within the trucking and logistics space. So they had a logistics arm, trucking arm, and a factoring arm. They had about 4 or 5 employees and went there, moved down to Houston, Texas for 7.5 years, grew them for a number of years. They became an acquisition target level type of company and got to start off on the ground level with no one there and grow them to what they were. And it was at that point in 2019 that I decided to branch off and start Operfi. And so we still do similar offerings. We offer factoring services within the transportation and logistics space, but there was something that I thought was unique, that all of my best clients at my last shop were all veteran-owned businesses. And I thought that there was something there. And so we obviously Operfi, we service all different types of trucking and logistics companies. But we do offer veteran discounts. We're heavily centered on veteran causes. We donate a portion of profits every month and all of our clients. And it's what has led me here today and what's interesting is that from 25 years old and running away from the military to now, fast forward, I feel like I left a lot on the table. So it's my kind of obligation to hopefully maybe give back to other entrepreneurs that are transitioning out, or just be able to share some of the experiences that I've learned in my transition to where I am today.
When you talk about leaving something on the table, what do you mean by that? Leaving, you maybe didn't give everything to the service that you thought that you would, or maybe just a hindsight bias, or what is that?
It's probably a little bit of both. I feel like I everyone kind of gives you hell because you're in the Air Force. They call it the chair force. And I always fire back, say, hey, I was in maintenance. And so we were knuckle dragging and we were always working 12-hour shifts and on a plane that was constantly breaking. But I felt like my military service career was the easiest thing that I ever did. And I think that's where maybe I left a lot on the table. Like I could have done more. And it's easy because going to the military was it was what made it so easy is that you knew when your paychecks were coming, you knew that you were going to get 3 meals a day, you knew that you had shelter, that Uncle Sam was taking care of you. And I guess while I was in, I was heavily focused on, I want to finish my degree and I want to do this. And I guess you could say maybe a little bit selfish, didn't go on as many deployments as I should have, didn't contribute, didn't I didn't get my 7 series, my 7 level, and I was able to make rank very quickly, but I could have put in for more opportunities that I think benefited the Air Force. And I think at that point I was on my way out, so to speak. I was under that 2-year slope where what's next? What am I going to do when I get out? And so looking back now, I could have transitioned into a different career field. Who knows? I could have I'm grateful for the decisions that I've made now, but when you look back hindsight, you go, it was really great for me. And even though I was young and I was dumb and I was 24 years old trying to just figure my life out, I think that in hindsight, I can look back and say there was a lot of things that the military did that I really benefit that set me up for life. That if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be where I am today. And for that reason, I feel like that's maybe where I left some stuff on the table that it's time for me to pay some of those dividends back, help other veterans, or if there's anything that I could do to help our clients, that sort of thing.
There is such like a heavy fog that is on your mind, I think, while you're in the service that really starts to clear when you're out, that shines light on things that you just didn't really realize at the time. And so I I sympathize with that. I also had similar sentiment on a lot of things, and it just sometimes even just surviving is that's a good win there, as just making it through. But it's cool that you feel that sense of service still, and I think that a lot of the more interesting people that I talk to feel that sense of obligation, even if it's not out of guilt, but like the ability to give back in a meaningful way and maybe even more impactful based on like however you want to measure it. But you can still be serving without necessarily being in a uniform. Like you can
Yeah.
still serve that population and do things that advance that veteran narrative.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. I really feel like for me, it was in 2020 where kind of all this, like the light bulbs were starting to really flicker on. Was we, I had, this was all during COVID and it was Memorial Day of 2020, I think it was. And there were buddies of mine who were all military, all my old Air Force buddies. And for whatever reason, we had a reunion and we hadn't seen each other in 10 plus years. And there was something about that we flew out to Ohio. One of my buddies has, and all of us we still have a few guys that are in, and some of us that majority of us got out. And we ended up just getting together. And there was something about getting those guys, that group of guys together. It was like no time had passed. And we were our dumb selves at 24 years old again and just going wild and having a good time. And it really solidified that military, that brotherhood, and that there's something, that camaraderie that you experience. And I think that it's something that's very hard to find in the civilian sector. And what's great now is I get that opportunity to speak with clients. And one of the first things is Okay, so what'd you do in the service? And we're just sharing stories back and forth. And obviously I'm always getting hell because, oh yeah, Air Force. And then eventually I'll get somebody who's in the Navy or somebody who's in the Air Force. Oh, okay, cool. We can talk. But no, it's very rewarding. And I think that there's something that's there, that there's that common bond that I think is just, it's very special. And I love it because I get to talk to fellow veterans every single day, and it's just something that's unique that builds that relationship, I think, for long term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a unique differentiator in your business, and you can connect with people on a different level. That's the service walking into a new relationship is you're already on step two or three of that relationship rather than on step one.
Yep.
Let's dig into a little bit of your business and like how you're serving those people today. I think probably the best place to get a grasp on what it is that you do now is like starting out with talking about what factoring even is. Because prior to the very first conversation that you and I had never even heard of factoring before. What is factoring and why does that matter?
No one in the factoring industry gets into factoring because they wanted to study factoring. Factoring is something that everybody falls into. It is so factoring is the buying and selling of accounts receivables. So a lot of business owners, and I believe that there's two different types of it, because you've got factoring that's seen in a negative light, and then you have factoring that's actually in a positive light. So what factoring is, it's an alternative specialty finance form of lending. It's not lending, because we're buying and selling accounts receivables, and we got to be careful there, because the legislators out there and the regulators want to call us lenders, and they want to slap all these different regulations on us. But it's the buying and selling of accounts receivable. So if you own a business, and say you're an entrepreneur and you've got a customer that's owing you $30,000, and whether it's a t-shirt business, say you have a t-shirt business that you just locked in an account with Kohl's, and you have a purchase order for X number of 20, 30,000, however many shirts there are, and you're selling that type of service or that product to a Kohl's, and Kohl's is your customer. Well, Kohl's isn't going to just say, hey, thanks for the product. Here you go. Here's your payment. They're going to set you up on net terms, net 30, net 60, net 90. So you don't have the working capital right now to be able to pay your overhead, pay your payroll, or just any of your operating expenses. So what factoring is, that you've got that accounts receivables, you've got $30,000 that Kohl's owes you. So what we do is we purchase your accounts receivables, and we will invoice Kohl's. Kohl's then in turn pays us. Meanwhile, you've gotten your funds on day one, and minus any discount fees or any other fees that are associated with that. So you have now the working capital to then go out and support your business. So where there are two different types of this, there's a distressed form of factoring, and then there's an entrepreneurial form of factoring. We play in the latter. If you hear about Coca-Cola and if they're factoring, if you hear about Fortune 500 companies, or a lot of people see factoring as, oh, there's this negative connotation because you don't have the financial capability to go out and finance this through a line of credit, or your banks are turning you down. Yeah, if you've got Fortune 500 big companies that are out there going off and selling their accounts receivables in order to get faster payments and working capital, that might be an issue, because that's a sign that their lenders maybe they don't feel as strong as their ability to continue to maintain their business. Then you have the entrepreneurial form of factoring, which is where we play in. And all of our clients are all mom and pop owner operators, anywhere from 1 to 5 truck operations. We have logistics companies. These are the individuals that have not hit their 2-year business requirement, where they are now bankable, where they can go out and see if they can get a $200,000, $300,000 line of credit with the bank. And so instead, they have purchase orders, they have receivables, but they have an intangible asset, and they're trying to utilize that asset in order to continue to get that working capital to keep their business up and running. So in that Kohl's example, you have that t-shirt company. Say, for example, you have fulfilled your obligations, you're owed $30,000, but then Kohl's says, all right, hey, Brock, I need another 30,000 shirts. If they're not paying you for 30 to 60 days, you need to go out and source 30,000 shirts, and you need to get all the raw materials, and you need to be able to support all that working capital. What factoring allows you to do is get the capital today. So then that way you can keep your business running smoothly and have that working capital to the point where you've hit 2 years in business and now you're bankable. Now you're a viable business and you can get away from factoring, but it's at least given you that stepping stone to be able to get to lower cost of capital, lower cost of funds in order to sustain your business for longer periods.
So is factoring primarily for that? I know we can talk specifically about what you do now, but factoring as a whole, is it primarily seen in smaller businesses that aren't bankable, as you said, in the entrepreneurial sector, not looking at the distress stuff, but it's primarily for upstart companies that don't have the ability to go to the bank for a loan. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. There's ways where obviously you can go out and you can start a business where you can get private equity money, you can get investors, you can go to vulture capitalists and all that type of stuff. Or if you have, or if you already have a business model that's has some sort of cash flow and you've got customers and you've got receivables out there, there are what I mean, it's a so us as the factoring company, we're collateralized off of their accounts receivables. And so it's no different than if you do inventory financing. If you have a company that's out there and they've got X number of computers in their warehouse and they're trying to get some sort of loan and they're collateralized off of the inventory that's in their warehouse, that's another alternative financing source as well. Our asset, instead of being a tangible, it's more of an intangible asset. It's an accounts receivables. And so we're actually purchasing that. And I think the perfect segue and kind of story and why I'm so passionate about it as well. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I was not born. I didn't. I worked my butt off to get to where I am today. When I started in 2019, I didn't have a lot of resources. I didn't have. I did have banking relationships because of my time in the industry. I had a lot of different connections, and I could reach out to individuals. And the first answer was, "We have all the confidence that you know this space and that you're going to do well, but you don't have your 2 years yet." And that to me was like, what am I going to do? I can only grow it to this. If I can raise some capital, great, but I'm only going to be able to grow it to a certain amount. And at that point, you need to be able to leverage, go out and find bank money to be able to leverage what I wanted to do. And I was introduced at that point to a general factor. And they said, why don't you partner up? They're one of our clients. Why don't you partner up with this other factoring company? And essentially, what I did is I factored my factored invoices. So I factored myself, my business, in order to grow it to the point where after 2 years, I was bankable. And so I was actually buying invoices for my trucking companies and helping them finance their business. Meanwhile, I was reselling those. My lender essentially was my factoring company. So there's ways to have a co-factoring relationship to the point where after 2 years, I met those requirements and I met those positive cash flow and tax return requirements. So then I can present it to a bank and a credit department. And then that bank said, hey, all right, here you go. Here's your line of credit. So that's what I love about factoring. And that's why there's that negative side that I just really can't stand, because it allows you to go out there and capture the American dream and build a business and not give away all your equity and be able to bootstrap your way. Yeah, is it expensive? Yeah, sure. But at the same time, you walk away from it and you have not sold off 75% of your company. You've been able to just bootstrap it to the point where now you're seen as a viable business and you've got bank money, and it allows you that opportunity to scale.
Well, and I'm sure that you, like, having done it yourself obviously gives you so much buy-in into just the space in itself. If you were able to build your own business off of the back of it, then that says something about it, and probably the perfect person, a perfect spokesperson to be talking about why factoring doesn't have to be a dirty thing. You called it expensive. What are the fees of this look like? Is there standard fees, or is it really depend on the customer and your relationship and all of those things?
Spot on. Yeah. There's so many different variables that play into it, which is why, going back to why legislators like to think of us as a lender, and they want to have put strict requirements and disclosure laws and force factoring companies to figure out like an annual percentage rate, like an APR. So they see us as, and when you group us into the lending category, all you think about is all we do is just give clients money as opposed to the other services that we do. It's a lot more complex. With a factoring relationship, and especially like with what we do, we're in the trucking space. We are giving our clients credit check services. We are doing their invoicing for them. We are doing their collections for them. We provide them training. We have a training program for them. We are taking entrepreneurs who have been maybe a truck driver their entire life, but now they're branching off into their own authority. We spend a lot of time and energy and administrative power to help train them in order to be a successful business owner years down the road. And if this was just a financial transaction, we're going to take your invoice and here's the money for it or whatever. A lot of industries, and like what banks would do is banks would say, okay, here, Brock, here's $100,000, but you're going to invoice it yourself. You're going to collect it yourself. You're going to do this. You're going to basically the onus is on you. And all I've given you is capital. And that is a transaction where that's a loan and you can calculate an annual percentage rate off of it. And factoring, it's much more of a service-driven type of industry where we're working with our clients. We're telling them which customers that they should or should not work with. So we spend a lot of time, and going back to that, the cost structure of it. It depends on the industry. So trucking has gotten to the point where factoring has become such a commodity that it's very competitive. There's probably 300 plus trucking transportation factoring companies that are out there. So the rates on it are gotten very competitive, high advance rates. But the industry is very mature when it comes to factoring. All of the customers know, all of the other entities that are working in our space, they understand factoring. So it's our legal challenges have gotten fairly reduced. And so it's not much of a struggle. It's very easy to start up a transportation factoring company because of it's mature in our industry. But that being said, there's construction factoring, right? Where if you have a construction company who is going out and building a hospital, majority of those types of transactions and projects are going to be they do like a percentage of completion billing process. And so when the project is 25% done, 50% done, 75%, et cetera. And so that first 25%, the factoring company is going to advance the general contractor, who then needs to go out and hire an electrician. They hire somebody who's does roofing or whatever specialty, whatever subcontracted person that they're hiring. They need to pay for raw materials and pay for those individuals to come out just to get to that 25% of completion. So there's a lot more nuances to the construction space. There's staffing, there's apparel. So all the fee structures are all completely different. It also depends on, I think you hit it on the head, the customer. If the customer has terrible credit or they don't pay their bills in 120 days, everything about factoring is based off of how quickly we can collect our money. So if I put $1,000 out there by buying an invoice, how quickly am I? Because I have to pay my banks. And ever since March of last year, we've seen interest rates do this, right? Just constantly going up. One of my biggest overhead costs is cost of capital. So if I put $1,000 out there in the market and it takes me 30 days to collect it, I did pretty good. If it's going to take 60 days, if it's going to take 90 days or 120 days, obviously I'm spending more because my lenders are charging me for every single day that dollar is out there. And so to answer your question, it always depends on those scenarios, which is very difficult to put an annual percentage rate on what factoring is. Not only do we handhold our clients and provide that service of that we're invoicing them, we're doing their collections on their behalf and all the other support that we're providing them, but they're dealing with thousands of different customers that are out there that have completely different terms. And so to say that it's going to cost X APR, it's nearly almost impossible. Hopefully that I answered some of your question on how much it costs and that sort of thing.
No, that's great. It definitely sounds complex to address all of the different portions of this. Why is it that you offer all these like subsidiary services? You said that you could just do the factoring portion of it, but you also layer on all these other things. Is that due to the nature of like competition and like all of the factoring companies also do that, so you have to do it? Or why do you have to offer those things?
I think it's a combination of both. I think that you made a very good point. Competition. How are you different? We've got hundreds of factoring companies that are out there in my space. What makes you different from the next one? And so a lot of and a lot of us as factors, we're adding a lot of similar services. Like I said, once you're a commodity, once your industry is basically a commodity, what makes you different? Oh, it's we answer the phone or we do this or we do that. But I think for us, the way that we see it is, for example, we launched our training program where we have now a training program that a lot of in our space, trucking, we have a lot of individuals that were a driver, company driver for 20 years, but they never branched off. There's in trucking, you've got three different levels of carriers or drivers, let's say, or individuals that are in the truck. You have a company driver. That individual is working for a Walmart or an Estes or hopefully not Yellow, who recently went belly up. But that individual is usually like an hourly employee or something like that. And so and you've got, or salaried, and you've got individuals that are company drivers. They don't own the equipment, right? So they're in the truck and the equipment belongs to the company. Then you've got owner operators. You can have an owner operator who is leased on to one of those larger companies. They own the truck, they might own the trailer, or they might be borrowing a trailer, or however that works. But at least they've got more skin in the game. That's their truck. They have to maintain it. There's different elements as far as like how the insurance is split. Maybe the owner operator is paying for the insurance or the company pays for the insurance. And so that plays into the percentages that the driver gets. And then lastly, you have a independent owner operator. That's the guy who said, after 20 years, I'm going to go out on my own and I'm going to hop in the truck. I'm going to be my own business owner. I'm going to be a trucking entrepreneur. Those are the individuals that we work with every single day. And I think to go back to your question, the lifespan, and I think that this just goes for any entrepreneur, that most entrepreneurial endeavors don't even last 5 years. And in trucking, it's even worse. I want to say it's 80% of brand new businesses fail in the first year. And so when you've got such a high percentage rate, what we see it as is I don't want to spend all of our time and energy bringing clients on and then having them fall off the wayside because they weren't educated and they didn't have the resources to be successful. So we saw that a lot during COVID. We brought on so many carriers and a lot because everybody was like, it was just this flow of individuals coming from different industries. I want to get into trucking because, man, the supply chain issues that's happening, there's so much money to be made, which was true. There was a lot of money to be made. But just as many of those individuals got into the space, just as many are not in that space anymore because they just did not have the education or the resources. And so we saw that as an opportunity to put together a training program that says, here's how to build a business plan. Here's how to understand your break-even cost per mile, and just explain to them the fraud that's in this industry and just how to be successful. And we saw that as our differentiator because what we want to do is we want to protect the golden goose, which is our client. If they can make it past that first year, chances are we're going to have a long relationship with them for the next 5 to 10 years. So you have to differentiate yourself in different ways like that. And I feel like and just building those relationships with your clients, I think are super important.
So, because of the high turnover in the industry, which I'm guessing is partially driven by, I guess, low barriers to entry. If you go buy a truck and get a CDL, you can probably start a business. I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah.
So, a lot of new entrants into the market, you guys are differentiating by trying to keep them in business as long as possible and trying to overcome. That's super slick. I
Yeah.
think you're like, that it's a high turnover thing and you're trying to prevent them from going out of business, which then in turn keeps you in business.
And to going back to where I think and California is like this, New Jersey, New York, Utah, there's certain states where the legislative bodies up in their ivory towers, they don't really, they see like us as a factoring industry as being like, oh, we're like a hard money lender, right? We charge high fees. If you look at it from an APR perspective, there's so much negative light when you think about it and even in the trucking industry, people are like, oh, bloodsuckers, because there are a lot of bad factors that are out there that treat that relationship just like that. But there's so many good factors that are out there that really care about helping their clients, helping them understand. And I think that if more banks had that type of level of education and support and explaining, but it takes time, it takes energy. And I don't think not everybody wants to learn, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But if you keep providing them those resources, you're going to have a lot more success than not. And I always go back to protect the golden goose, and the golden goose is what keeps my business running. And so if we can provide as much value to them, then eventually, and that just, I think it trickles back to help benefit yourself in the long run.
Is the training and like the extra resources and stuff that you guys are offering, are you doing that for free? Is that something like an added service? Or, and then how are you measuring the efficacy of that training? Is there anything that you can do to tie that? Or is it just, hey, we're trying to help you as much as we can here with this?
This is new for us. And I
Okay.
think when we started the training, it was, I love to train. I love to help our clients. I had a phone call with somebody who was going through an issue today, wasn't even our client, and I was helping him to understand the fraud that he was experiencing. And for him, it was that light bulb that went off. And I'm paid forward type of person. I feel that the universe or however, like there's going to be some dividends that pay it back, do unto others type, that sort of thing. And I originally, there was also a little bit of a selfish intent in the training methodologies where I my team members were constantly on the phone with a carrier explaining them to them basic terminology stuff. And so I was like, man, I got to get our clients off the phone because it's taking up too much time for my team to be able to get their daily tasks done. And so we started out just making a series of videos of common things that we were seeing. And then that kind of evolved into this full-fledged training program for them to just better understand how to put this business model together and just what they're getting themselves into. As far as that train understanding the efficacy of it, I'll let you know. I do know that we've gotten really good phone calls of people that have told me, "Hey, I've been working with a dispatcher for the past 2 years and I did your training and I now know that they were lying to me. And I now know that they were hiding this from me or that from me." So there is this kind of, okay, I think that we're onto something here and we're helping. And there's so many BS training there's, if you're in the trucking space, you can go out there on Facebook and all social media, and there's these people that will sell you training and they're going to charge you $2,000. And then they're using individuals who don't understand the space at all. And I see it. We do offer it for non-clients. It's like $250, but for me, it's 100% free for our clients. If you're coming on board with us, then we want to expose you to, this is what we have the benefit of working with thousands of carriers throughout all of our careers and being able to see what works and doesn't work. And when you have somebody who's brand new into this space and it's just been them, then we've got the benefit of seeing thousands of transactions every single month. And so we see the problems and we have a very unique view of the industry on a granular level and a macro and granular, because when we have that problem, we're like, oh, wow, this is an interesting one. And we get to relay that to our clients. And so I think that's the important thing, is just getting that content out there. So then they realize how much fraud is in this space, how to protect them. And hopefully you're not going to get to everybody, but the goal is to provide and make that content available to have as much success as you possibly can, I guess.
It's interesting you bring up how many data points and stuff that you have. I was literally just thinking, I'm a big data nerd, and I was like, man, there has got to be so much information that is collected from your guys' side about, you're not only seeing all of these different customers from like the trucking perspective, but you're also seeing default rates on from like the customer or whoever is going to be billing the carrier. You're seeing how long it's taking to pay. Like, you're seeing so much, and that's probably like a really interesting proxy for, I don't, health of the economy, maybe.
Yeah.
What and I have some questions about what you are seeing there, and we'll get into that. But yeah, I would imagine that there is so much information that you guys can use to really dig in and make well-informed decisions.
There's a lot of data play in this industry, and there's been a lot of interest, I want to say, in the past, I guess, 8 years, where a lot of VCs, private equity companies, startups that are getting involved, and just the number of transactions that are happening. Oh, so to give you an idea of the size of the industry, trucking and logistics, an $800 billion a year industry. 90% of I want to say there's anywhere from 750 to 800,000 trucking companies that are in the United States. 90% of those trucking companies, there's 3.6 million semis that are out there, I believe. I can't remember. I don't know the numbers really off the top of my head. But as far as the businesses that are in there, that's 750, 800,000 businesses that are there. 90% of those companies are 6 trucks or less. And so when you think about the factoring industry as a whole in this $800 billion space, those 1 to 5 truck operations, they make up the majority. Now, you're going to see the Estises and the Yellows and the JB Hunts and Landstars. You've got, when you are driving on the highway next time and you pull up to a semi, you're going to see either they've got a maybe logo or a brand that you're familiar with that maybe you've seen before, or you're also going to see ones that will have that logo or brand, and then they're going to have a small little placard on their door that says Brock's Trucking, and it's going to have an MC number. That's a guy who's probably maybe leased on to one of those larger, he might be an owner operator. Or you might have a guy who just has his own trailer and it's just Brock's Trucking. He's an independent owner operator. But to think that the 90% of those companies are 6 trucks or less, which is great for us as an industry because it's what we're helping those. That's hence the reason why there's 300 plus factoring companies that are out there servicing all those different companies who aren't bankable, who need that support, that billing administrative support. But going back to the data points, what was really interesting was there was electronic logging devices, ELDs, that have been mandated, that I believe the mandate started in 2016. That changed a whole number of dynamics of our industry when it comes to data, because now you've got real-time data that every single truck was required to have this ELD plugged in that measured their hours of service, when they were running, when they were down, their mileage, when they were going from state to state. And so just that level of data has just been shown a ton of interest. And since then, the industry has just adapted to loads going from zip code to zip code and how that impacts freight rates, because there's so many different data points when it comes to what rates that you're seeing out there on load boards. There's contract rates, there's spot rates, there's all these different metrics that everybody is just hungry for. And so you see a ton of different interest from a lot of different investors throughout the country. And just even our small, we're a tiny little nobody in the world of trucking, to be honest with you. But the amount of data that we get to see, and we track it down to the invoice volumes and what invoice sizes that we were purchasing back in March of 2022 to the invoice sizes that we're purchasing now, you really get to see those macroeconomic variables at play. So very super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting as well. And that is, there's so much that's to that and a lot of moving pieces. And these are the businesses that keep this country going, really. Just freight is such a massive and important industry to this country. It's unbelievable. So you've been running Operfi, started and running since 2019. Maybe can you give me a sense of the size and scale of the business today? How do you measure size? As if it's purchases, is it revenue? I'm not sure exactly how you would measure that, but give me a sense for size and scale today, and then maybe what you're looking to accomplish over the next 5 years.
When you talk about everybody, there's a little bit of faux pas when you talk in our industry specifically, when it's your portfolio sizes, account size, and all that type of stuff, because everybody's comparing themselves to everybody. We're small fish. We're under 10 million, I guess you could say, under assets, or under 10 million in portfolio size. We have less than 1,000 carriers, 1,000 trucks that are out there on the road. We see that the majority of our clients are 1 to 2 truck operations, and each one of those clients is doing kind of $20,000 to $25,000 a month. And so we've been able to grow substantially over the years from 2019. So I remember our first client and our first invoice was actually an Air Force veteran, and that was that light bulb for me. And it told me, hey, you're onto the right track. And going back, starting in 2019. And then since then, we had a really decent boom when it came to COVID. I think we grew about that COVID boom. I want to say we probably grew a good 100%. But during that period of time, we brought on so many clients. And like I said earlier, a lot of them fall off within that first year. And so we lost a good chunk of the clients that we acquired. However, what's been great and very rewarding for us as a team is we've been able to keep level. The majority of the factoring industry and the trucking industry as a whole since July of last year has taken a big dip. And it's fuel prices went up, supply and demand issues, demand dropped significantly. It was oversaturated. You had too many trucks that were out there on the road, not as much freight. During COVID, we had this huge demand. Everybody was buying up products left and right. And then since then, that demand has dropped. Interest rates have been going up. And so there's been less demand, less freight, and too many carriers out on the road. And so you've seen a lot of those. So the majority of our friendly competitors out in the market, everybody saw a 30 to 40% drop in business. And we were fortunate that we've been able to keep steady Eddie and for us, what we've been doing is, and to be able to stay flat during that time period for us was incredible because it showed us that not only we've been able to keep the number of clients on, so we've been adding during that time, which has allowed us to kind of plateau. So that's been something that's been really, I'm blessed and fortunate with my team. And again, we bring on good clients, we help train them, and we did have a lot that fell off. But I think it shows you too that even though during those hard times, you can still figure out ways to maintain and I see it as even being flat during that time period was really good progress because now once the economy does turn around again, then hopefully we're going to see that hockey stick that we're looking to achieve.
You were telling me in our very first conversation about a road trip that you took to help grow the business and do some kind of boots on the ground conversations. Do you
Yeah.
want to recount that story and talk about how that was maybe influential to the early days?
So I this back in again getting out of grad school, starting with this other company who had 5 employees and growing them for a number of years, had that entrepreneurial itch, and I was thinking about different phone apps and different ideas of businesses I could start. My wife, she was a nurse at the time, coming up with different harebrained ideas, and she's like, "No, you don't know anything about that. No, you can't do that." When I told her that I was thinking about starting up a factoring company, she's like, "Yes, you've done that for 7 years. You understand that. I can get on board with that." So at that point, kind of the wheels were in motion. We were thinking about that my stepson at the time was just graduated from high school, so he was off to college. So empty nesters. And we were thinking, okay, maybe we were living in Houston, Texas. We're gonna move to Austin. We're gonna start this. And my wife, she was just gonna find another nursing gig. And I was out for a run one day and I saw one of those 1-800-GO RVing rigs on the side of the road. At the time, my dad was selling an RV. And my dad, backstory, he was a Vietnam vet, exposed to Agent Orange. And so he developed Parkinson's in later years. And he didn't have the ability, it's just parts of the condition to be able to operate the rig. And so he was looking to sell it. And I get back from that run and I say, "Hey, babe, what do you think rather than us moving to Austin or starting the business here, doing this, like, why don't we just pack everything in storage and take the dogs and hit the road in an RV and just see where it takes us?" And she totally bought in. And we were able to pack everything up. The goal was that we thought we were going to be getting closer to family. And with my dad up in Boise, Idaho, we were going to spend a lot of time with him and seeing if we wanted to lay roots there or just what we wanted to do and how we wanted to make this transition. So we packed off. It was May of 19 and we hit the road, and it was perfect for a brand new struggling business because you're going to struggle, might as well enjoy it while you're doing it. Very unique. We had trucking products that were tied into our rig, those ELDs. I had an ELD on my rig, so I was testing out trucking products, fuel cards, phone apps, and it allowed me an opportunity to stop off at truck stops and just passing out business cards. And it was a real grassroots campaign of meeting clients and customers out on the road. So we did that for 10 months, traveled the country. We did 35 different states, but it's what really, I think, started building those relationships with those clients, customers, and vendors and kickstarting things. And then fast forward January of 2020, January, February, things were getting so busy. And we decided, you know what, we loved Phoenix, we loved Arizona, and there was something about northern Arizona, southern Utah, one of the most beautiful landscapes in the country. So we packed up, we head out west, and we've been here for the past 3.5 years and absolutely loving it. So yeah, it was the most incredible experience, but it's what really kickstarted everything. So we're super grateful and we would do it again in a heartbeat.
I'm such a sucker for those like business launch stories and when people do things that just don't scale at all. There's nothing that doesn't scale quite like driving across the country and handing out business cards at truck stops. I bet that gave you an unbelievably clear line of sight into the problems that you were looking to solve and the faces of the people behind them because
Yeah.
that's I could see how this would be very you could hole up in an office and like never really talk to anybody if you don't want to, but getting out on the road and like seeing those people, I'm sure that was very influential and probably gave you a lot of credit in the early days when you're just trying to get off the ground.
So at my last shop, when it came to technology, operations, and scaling the business, I had all those pieces figured out. The only thing I didn't have figured out, banking relationships, the financing pieces, all of those critical things that you need to be able to. I was an operator. I was the vice president of operations, and that's what my role was, is operations. I didn't know anything about sales. That to me was like, that was the one piece. I said, if I could figure out the sales piece, I can figure out how to scale this business and we can go from there. And it forced me to, I would go out, like I said, we were talking earlier about going for runs, and I was going to truck stops and I was selling, I guess instead of door to door, I was selling truck to truck, just knocking on it. And I look at those placards on the doors and I'd say, okay, that guy's probably a company driver, that guy's this. And I would go and I would actually find those interactions with individuals. And carriers, man, they love to talk about their rigs too. And so if you find them and they're in a good mood and they're, hey, come on in, take a look, check out what I got. Yeah, exactly. You got to see a lot of those problems. And I had some real hell just in a Walmart parking lot at 1 in the morning. And literally you're going through and you meet somebody that's in a Walmart parking lot and you're asking them just general questions like, hey man, are you out of service right now? What are you doing? And you just get to talking and it just one thing leads to another and you start developing relationships and just great contacts that have stuck with us for the past 4 years.
You don't have to drive very far down the highway to see some really crazy customized rigs and stuff like that. And I
Yeah.
don't know any truck drivers personally, but I can only imagine that you meet some interesting characters because there is just some really wild customization that you can do that people you can tell just like people buy a nice car. It's if you're gonna literally be on the road 7 days a week, drive 12 hours a day and sleep in it, you better love it because it's basically your house too.
And the stories that you get to hear about individuals and the freight that they haul is there's just so we have a unique position because we were in the military. And I'm sure that when you look back to your Navy career, you probably think, because I did when I was in, my buddies and I, we would talk about, we'd be on the flight line and we'd see all these massive birds and you'd go, man, there's not too many people that get to see what we see. It's just super unique that they trust 18-year-old kids to work on these multi-million-dollar aircraft and on these ships. And so you see a lot of unique things. And I feel in the trucking space, if you talk to a carrier about, hey, what's the most unique things that you have hauled? Oh man, I've spoken with clients who they have hauled loads from the Smithsonian and they had to be escorted, like police escorts and all this other stuff, and they have no idea. Come to find out, they're hauling, and the insurance requirements were through the freaking roof. What the hell am I hauling back here? And they find out that they're like hauling one of Hitler's personal vehicles, or we've had loads of dead chickens that they're taking to incinerators because they were exposed to like bird flu. And I've got a client right now that's on tour with Billy Joel. You have those types of experiences where like they're hauling around some cool stuff and having those conversations with clients. And obviously you have all your normal stuff. During COVID, it was crazy because it was like toilet paper. That was like the big thing. We had a lot of carriers that they were in those lines that were hundreds of trucks long at a Procter and Gamble plant, and they were trying to get loaded with toilet paper to supply the rest of the country. So you hear a whole bunch of different stories. It's always fun talking to carriers, and they love talking about either their rigs or the freight that they're hauling.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure the range of things there is just massive. I had mentioned this earlier, talking about like maybe risks or like a see through to the economy. I'd love to just maybe talk at a high level about what the risks of that you see maybe in the trucking industry, maybe in factoring. You had mentioned that you guys actually borrow to acquire receivables. And so that kind of brings into account the whole interest rate discussion and like how that pertains to you guys. How do you think about managing risk when it comes to of something that like is completely out of your control on the money side?
Super interesting question, and something that you there's who is it that basically says if you've got like your internal and external locusts of control, and you have to focus on what your internal locus of control is, because that's really the only thing that you can, anything outside of that, and you've got all of these macroeconomic variables. Do you have to think about them? Absolutely. But you can't necessarily hedge any bets against it. It's just things that are going to happen. Our industry, we've gone through, since I've been in this space, probably 3 or 4 different kind of downturns. We're almost at the bottom, and I think that we're there. It's so trucking is a leading.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
ask really quick,
Yeah.
what makes you say that? Bottom line?
Everyone's watching it very closely. We look at freight rates. We had and by freight rates, I mean, you can go out there and there's like public data there's all of these different data aggregators that are posting all of these. They have loads that are publicly available on load boards. And so if you and I were independent carriers, we would subscribe to a specific load board where all these customers and brokers are posting loads, and it's going from zip code to zip code, and they're offering it at a per dollar a mile rate. So you can think of it as right now, I think that we're anywhere from, there's some loads where it's like $1.80, which is like nothing. And then you've got up towards, and it depends on the equipment type, right? So you could have refrigerated freight, reefers. You could have flatbed freight. So obviously you're going to have oversized, overdimensional, and you're going to have like your basic dry van. You're going to have just regular retail. It doesn't require any type of temperature or anything like that. And so each requirement, one of the ideas also is the more expensive the trailer, typically the more expensive the commodity is to move from point A to point B, because it's more specialized. A refrigerated unit, you have to put you need diesel in order to just have your refrigerated components, the reefer components that temperature control your trailer. That's another component of running and operating that rig. So obviously the rates on those reefers are going to be more expensive. Everything depends on the industry. Everything depends on the season. In the summertime, there's more construction that's going on. There's not as much snow that's out there. So some of those larger tractor trailers or steel beams or whatever it is, the commodity that's being hauled, a lot of that stuff is all seasonal. But the load boards have aggregated all this data, zip code to zip code, and they will tell you the average rates for a refrigerated, dry van, flatbed, hot shot, all the different carrier types. And so you'll know what that dollar per mile rate is. And during COVID, we had carriers that, I have buddies in the RV industry up in Elkhart, Indiana, that they were paying $18,000 to $30,000 for a container that was off the ports of LA, just to get that container to their manufacturing facility, because that manufacturing facility was on the verge of shutting down because they had to produce so many RVs, and they were looking for microchips, refrigerators, whatever components that were being held up during COVID. And so they were spending a ton of money for freight. And so freight rates at that point, $5, $6. Carriers had so much pricing power because we needed, the demand was so high. And so fast forward, you had this massive opportunity to get into trucking. And so individuals like yourself, people that were in so many different industries, got into trucking because they saw that opportunity. $5 a mile, hell, anybody can make money. So they get into it. Now we have an oversaturated environment. And then the second that fuel prices went up and freight rates went down because demand was lowering. And demand is a function of obviously us as consumers. There's inflation, that's a big part of it. So you have inflation that's going up. Meanwhile, the Fed continues to rise those interest rates. Boom. Those big companies, they're not building as much. They're not extending those long-term contracts. They're not importing as much. So now, because their financing is a lot more expensive, then a lot of those projects get put on the back burner. And so there's this depression of in natural depression that happens in the economy where, and then there's just not as demand that's out there. So not only you had this perfect storm of macroeconomic and variables where freight rates went from $5 a mile and then fuel prices went up significantly. And you have so much oversaturation where now carriers have zero pricing power and it gets so competitive. Rates went down to $1.50. I've seen rates as low as $1 a mile, which to operate a trucking company, you need a bare minimum of $1.75. If you are an independent an owner operator, and maybe you don't even have a truck payment or something, it just depends on all those different variables. But $1.75, $1.80, I think are like the break even point for running a trucking company. And when rates are out there on the load boards that are offering at $1.60, it's like these guys are losing, they're spending more on fuel to get this load delivered than they are putting in their pocket. They can't make insurance payments. So it was and because trucking is a leading indicator, you get to see what's about to happen with the rest of the country. Because if all of those big corporate 500, those big corporate companies, if they're not investing long term into those either projects or a lot more imported goods that are coming in, then obviously the trucking and the freight demand is gonna drop. And so it's just a very interesting space because you can see what potentially, I wanna say it's like a 7 to 8 month lag. And we've now finally gotten to that point where freight rates are at an all-time low. I don't think we've ever seen them as low as they are. And that it's everybody's now talking about, okay, now we're gonna start to see that curve where we're finally gonna see some light at the end of the tunnel. And I always tell new carriers getting in, you're entering at a perfect time because if you can make money or break even right now, it's like Warren Buffett, right? Buy low, sell high. You're perfectly. I had clients who got in during the peak of COVID and they were making hand over fist and they were buying Rolexes and they were buying fancy cars. Guess what? When the industry and all the rates flopped upside down, they were out of business just like that because they couldn't afford everything that they had. They built a lifestyle on something and on an industry that wasn't sustainable. So it's nice getting the clients right now because they're getting their kicks in the teeth right now. And then hopefully they can scale it as it grows.
Yeah, if they can hang with you right now, that you know that they're going to be good clients and good customers for you. I
Absolutely.
guess that what you explained about the interest rate thing is trucking is a leading indicator, but sensitive to interest rates in the way that the larger companies that are like moving this freight around, they are actually the ones that are beholden to the interest rates. And when they spend less money, then there's less freight. So freight is like a derivative of the larger organizations or the countries need to be moving things.
Every large corporation is out there. They're using cheap money and leveraging it to be able to finance larger projects or infrastructure or whatever it is that they see 5 or 10 years down the road. And when the cost of that capital is significantly increased, then obviously they're going to have to curb those projects, and those curbing of those projects then trickle down into those. Though, if you had 1,000 loads of whatever containers that those were going to be, or maybe it's oil and gas and you had bundle of pipe that was going to get shipped over from Turkey or something like that. Maybe they're not building that infrastructure. And oil and gas, it has its own industry dynamics. And I don't know anything about oil and gas. I'm not going to pretend like I do because they've got so many different more macro and there's foreign policy that goes into that. And there's so many different world variables that happen there. But from just a domestic business that's here stateside, they might not finance that growth of building those hospitals or building those commercial real estate properties or whatever it is, because they're leveraging their money with financial institutions. And now that money that they were getting at 3-4% last year, now they're getting at 9-10%. And they're like, no, how about we hold off on that? We keep steady Eddie and keep doing what we're doing. And the second interest rates go down, then we'll finance those big projects. So it's just, and that's exactly what it's designed to do. Once inflation is going through the roof like that, then that's one of the reasons that they try to tamper it down.
Throughout your time working in and around this space, what do you think is the big opportunity for anybody maybe looking to get into this space? I know you have a soft spot in your heart for vets. Maybe what is it that vets should be thinking about when it comes to this business? And anything else that really stands out to you as a major lesson learned that other people should be considering?
So I think, and I'll maybe tackle it in a couple of different ways. I think that I'm passionate about helping veterans. I think that they're an underserved demographic in the business community. I think that the fact that USA does not have a commercial division, a lending division, I think is just, they really need to refocus their energies and really think about that, because I believe veterans make the best entrepreneurs. And I think that there's something about the military that breeds an entrepreneur. That you and I, we both come from an environment where we had 5,000 bosses that were yelling at us. And anybody from around the country can tell us that they outranked us and they can tell us what to do. And I think that there's that fire that when a lot of veterans that they get out, they go, I don't want to work for anybody anymore. There's that entrepreneurial drive and that fire. And I believe that even working with my last company and seeing there's something about attention to detail, there's something about integrity, there's something about resilience and all these different core values that I think that the military breeds, that it is, for me, I see it as they're my best clients to work with, because I don't lose a wink of sleep at night. And I know that they're going to do the right thing and that we're going to work together to resolve problems, because problems will pop up, but we're going to get the job done. And I think that I just think that there's a vast majority of either financing relationships or lenders or just the business community as a whole. I think that they undervalue and underappreciate what the military does to help build business owners. And we talked about this previously too, when you look about whether it's successful politicians or successful leaders that we've heard about in history, and that you said that there's that military piece that's just like a footnote. And I think that there's more to that. And I think that something that the military does that helps to breed, I guess, good entrepreneurship, good idea, thought leaders. They need to get removed from it. I think is probably it comes after some time. But as far as where I see that opportunity in my space is, our goal, I want to be the number one veteran transportation factoring company. I see us transitioning into different industries. I want to get into different commercial B2B specialty finance areas. If there's other commercial businesses that are out there that are looking for alternative financing solutions and they're not quite bankable, if they're veterans, I want to explore those options. But our goal is, first and foremost, we want to be the number one transportation factoring company that's out there that's supporting veterans. And by doing so, we want to be able to drop our rates as much as possible to attract all of those individuals, because there's a philanthropic piece that we want to be able to give back to that community. But then that's our kind of medium term goal. And then long term goal, we see this potential opportunity to provide a platform where, just like I had the opportunity where I went from a factoring company to a bank, my goal is to bring on other business owners who aren't bankable, and we can give them that financing opportunity and then transition them to a bank, because we see that value, that resilience. And so that's where I see, yeah, there's an opportunity there in the trucking and logistics space that I think we're going after, and we really want to participate there. But there's a much broader issue here on veterans as a whole and not having access to capital as much as possible. And I think that we would love to explore those spaces and help out some of those businesses.
It's an exciting mission to be pursuing. I don't have any doubt that you will achieve that if you aren't close already. I'm excited to see you guys grow and tackle that much larger mission than just your own personal one. So,
Cool.
thank you for that. I'm appreciative of your contribution to the veteran community.
Yeah.
Tom, this has been a really fun conversation. I'm grateful that you joined me. How can myself or anyone listening be useful to you?
I think that, like I said, the low hanging fruit there is anybody that's in the trucking and logistics space. I'm a networker. I love if I can help somebody out. And if it's just about experience or interest into this industry, I'll be available for that. Obviously, go to our website, operfi.com, and you can feel free, contact me. And I'm there to help you out for obviously the trucking and logistics space. But if you have other commercial financing opportunities, or I think that at the end of the day, the biggest message that I want to relay to individuals is that you don't have to go out and raise millions of dollars to go out and start your dream. And if there's transitioning individuals that are looking out and maybe thinking about business paths or business opportunities, there are these alternative financing options that are out there that can help you to get to that stepping point. And I would be happy to have those conversations, make introductions, see if we can be that service provider. But feel free, go to our website, give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'm happy to see what we can do to be a resource for you. But overall, Brock, this has been fun. I appreciate you having me on. It's awesome what you're doing.
I appreciate it, Tom. Thank you so much for your time.
Cool.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.